Shall we move to update on sustainability and transformation plans? And there's been quite a bit of progress over the last little while on this. And Bob, are you going to introduce this? And Jim, you will want to update on the meeting next week. And Malcolm, I know you will want to come.
As you say, this builds on previous reports that we've discussed around this table. And I'm not going to do a big preamble. I'm hoping that the report is clear about where we are. I'd probably just bring out your point. So in paras 7 and 8, unsurprisingly, STPs are at different stages of development, and there's been an iterative process in working along that development, and much of the data quality we saw in the very early ones has been resolved, but there's still a couple of things there, and that predominantly isn't around effectively the accuracy of the numbers, more the alignment of assumptions that give rise to particular numbers in particular STPs, and we'll work through that in an iterative way. I think the issues that are highlighted in paras 11 to 15 are interesting because in some way they have resonance with the conversation we've just had and in Jim's update previously. So there is something there about aligning demand in the STP to the reality of what's happening on the ground now. There is certainly something around triangulating the workforce expectation with need in the context of all of that. And inevitably there's a great focus in many of them about driving the efficiency agenda, and that's not just the efficiency within organisations in how they deploy resources, but how the decisions are made as to how resources are deployed in the first place. And inevitably it's easier to concentrate on the first one because the second one is quite tricky. But you need to manage those out. The next steps I think are quite clear because we are now into operational planning mode. And the STPs will set the framework for much of the operational planning. In some instances, to be honest, I think the operational planning will set the framework for how the STPs got to develop further. And that's going to be the piece of interaction that we need to take with our providers, and in working with NHS England and our other ALB parties, making sure that congruence exists over the piece. So I'm probably going to leave it there, Chair, and let Jim sort of come in and then respond to anything that board members might.
Thank you, Bob. And more recent updates, Jim, in terms of the work you're doing with Simon and colleagues.
Yeah, so we had a collection of exec colleagues from here with exec colleagues from NHS England met last Wednesday to have a bit of a stock take and a regroup on STP. Ready for the next phase. So as Bob said, we've got the operational planning things kicked in now. We need to be ready in January to be able to get the STPs to the next stage. What I would say is I think we're all in agreement, and I'll find nobody in the NHS who would disagree with the first bit, is it's been a useful and positive process of engagement and getting colleagues to think about the future together. However, it's all long-term planning process in the NHS. The expectation changes over time. So we started off answering a maths exam, and it's become a bit of a French and German exam over time. And I think we just need to go back and clarify what it is we're trying to solve in this process. So a lot of the feedback from people in the system is just remind us what we're trying to do here. There's obviously links to the planning round, and I think when people have fixed the 2-year planning round, as Bob said, it will make some of the STPs feel more doable and real, because it's very easy in long-term projections for things to look very big and impossible. But then when you come back to a shorter time frame, they become more practical, and then we can kind of rebase where we are. So there's a bit of effort going into all of that, and there's a very strong feeling out there about the need for better governance and certainly better engagement with the public and clinical staff. And I think a lot of that's being expressed recently. Again, I don't think anyone would really argue about all that. So I think the next phase has to visibly be more engaging and use the value of those conversations to shape a plan rather than say it as a threatening concern. So that's easy to say and hard to do, but we need to do it. And then finally, just going back to the earlier point, the big risk in the whole STP process is the gap between the aspiration from a demand point of view and the reality day to day. And hope we don't fall into the trap of having theoretical long-term plans that ignore the reality of the present day and the real task for us is to find ways of manage demand in a different sense of the way it's currently presented. And that's variable across the STP plans currently. We need to have more impact on that. So what we're trying to do is, Simon and I will write out what was going to be this week and maybe early next week now to just clarify those things, and then be ready in January to sweep in with more improvement support and make sure our regional teams are able to help people to the next stage. There's some specific things for us in that are helping people with governance models, decision-making models, good practice guides on engagement, those sorts of things, and connecting people across the country who are actually good at these things. So again, let's not look at these things as 44 silos. There's lots of good things happening in each of them. Let's connect them.
Malcolm, you must have these conversations in your board as well, and the collaboration between our two organisations is quite very strong.
Yeah, if I could just start on that, I mean, I think this is what is utterly distinctive and essential about this. There's a very strong interdependency between the two organisations, and I don't think we've got it absolutely right yet. I think that we can evince in public that we're working well together at this level, and board to board and chief executive and chair. Through our two organisations, I think there's a lot of joining up together to do. I mean, we will not succeed in trying to persuade our communities that they should be working more collaboratively unless we're absolutely joined together ourselves. So a lot of work which I know both Jim and Simon are taking through our organisations. Secondly, and on that point, a real sense that we need to review our own workforce capability to move from strategy to delivery, and there is an immense potential within this organisation, within ours, within the CSUs, within the CCGs, to work more closely as we come into operation and then into delivery. Thirdly, we always knew that there would be huge variation across the country in the STPs and what would come through from them. From one extreme, I think the suggestion is we're actually slowing people down from doing what they wanted to do and the consultations they're already undertaking by imposing a supervening structure on them. I think that's as it were, a bulge that will go through the system and will come out quite soon. The critical thing, I think, is how we assist all the STP footprints in bringing across the best practice from across the country. I mean, we've done an awful lot with these vanguards, but we're still only affecting 5-7% of the population. How do we get the best from these? How do we assist in other areas of getting people to realise the sense of the possible? I think the other, for me, critical component has been the role of local government. So we've got 4 leading local government figures leading 4 of our STPs, but with increasing involvement elsewhere. The complexity, though, that arises from all of this is in the next phase. We are being widely accused of having been doing backroom secret planning in order to carry through a series of cuts for the NHS. And even the language of cuts completely misunderstands the increase in real terms of the budget of the NHS, but nowhere near the increase in demand. So we come back to how we, in each of these areas, are able to change the governance structures where necessary, but much more importantly, the funding flows, so as to move the funding much more into the demand curve, and picking up on some of the really wonderful things that some of the vanguards have been doing. If I just use one, which really strikes me, it's the care homes vanguard. It just seems so self-evident that the more investment we put into the protection and the health of residents of care homes, the greater is our likely impact at the door of A&E, and I think we've now got good proof of this. So there are certain things that we would like to be able to spread good practice for across the country, recognising that the social geography of the country is hugely varied, but also the readiness of the major actors in different parts of the country is hugely varied. So the big decision for our 2 boards, I think, is where over the next 6 to 12 months we really focus our joint resources on carrying through the changes across the country that we need to do. So it's a very strong reason why I'm very pleased to be here today and to be able to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I think that demonstrates how joined up this needs to be going forward. Richard, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's 3 points, if I may, Chair. And the first one is, I was glad to hear what Jim said about the realism about demand and activity or something. And we've got a real challenge here, because we've got to try and do something about demand and activity, but people have been trying to do it and have said the same things for about 15 years, at least, to me. knowledge. And if you plan on the basis of something that you're not convinced you can achieve, you'll find the sort of gaps that we've seen over the last couple of years. So whatever we do around the demand and activity planning, you've got to set an incredibly high bar for people to prove that this will have the effect and not just hope for the best. I guess the second bit of realism on this would also be around the level of capital investment. So from what I've seen and heard, some of these plans assume pretty incredible levels of capital investment. And we've got to push back quite quickly on that and be clear about what is a realistic assumption for that. And I hope that's what we're doing as executive teams. And I guess the third point then was the one that Jim made about the chunking down of a problem into sort of bite-sized pieces across years. And that's absolutely right. I mean, you look at some of these, and on the gaps you see enormous numbers and it frightens life. Now, you think you can never do it. Now, if you think about that over a number of years, it becomes more doable. But it is then incumbent on us in looking at the plans for the next 2 years that people are dealing with the chunks and not pushing everything to the end of year 5 on this. So really getting that link between the operational planning and what the STPs are trying to achieve and not just worrying about sort of the next year.
Yeah, which reinforces Jim's joining the two together. Sarah, you wanted to go?
I just really wanted to pick up, and it probably refers back to the earlier debate we were having. It was disappointing the way that the press started covering this 2 weeks ago, and to pick up Malcolm's point, the idea that deals were being done in secret and it was all very bad news for everybody. We have to try and get on the front foot with that, and we need, I think, more help from local government as well, because they've got a lot of good things to say about this, and we just need all to be on the same hymn sheet. This is trying to be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think there are some communities have had good conversations with the public, but it's a work in progress. There isn't any plan that's ready to fly, and the benefits of those processes, you get feedback that can adjust the plan, and it's better at the end of it. And we need to help people have the confidence to do that properly, and there's techniques that people need to use as well. It's quite a technical process to do it effectively. Richard's point on capital is a good one, and the NHS processes are like this. People, I think, assumed it was a bidding process at the beginning, so the capital ask is massively inflated. And we will be, one of the things we will practically be doing is setting out a framework for ROI expectation on capital investment. And also there's a disconnect, I think, between the aspiration of an out-of-hospital care model but still in massive hospital rebuild, and there's a need for some hospital rebuild, but there's a serious absence of out-of-hospital infrastructure capital requirement in the plans, so which makes you think the execution is risky if we're not actually building the infrastructure to deal with that. So that will all get flushed out in the next phase.
Ruth, and then Ara, and then Caroline.
I wanted to bring back to paragraph 12 around workforce again. I think the next stage of SDP development is going to be really critical to get into the granular stuff around workforce, rather than, I think it could be a risk that perhaps some SDPs have looked at the number they need to get to and then worked out how many staff they can afford to get. What we'll need to help SDP leaders, clinical and non-clinical, is to make sure that there is a pathway approach to making sure we get the right workforce to meet that, and also a multi-professional approach, so that we can make sure that we align safety and quality with the number of workforce we've got to meet a financial envelope. But that, I think, is the next risk, but also a real important area of concentration that we need to concentrate next bit on workforce.
I've read this, and I think I'll start by saying that with the current economic climate, and it's quite a clear message, there is no more money. The only way you're going to get this ship back on track is some form of change. And this becomes even more of a priority than it did at the time of its launch. Correct. And this also needs to have a public narrative that goes with it. Sustainability and transformational plan is a very technical job. The narrative in High Quality Care for All was, we've done the quantity, we've increased the number of beds, the doctors, nurses, everything.
we're now going to focus on the quality, the experience. This needs a narrative now.
Yeah.
We're not out of money. We need to make some changes to ensure that we are providing safe and efficient care. That's where we are. And that narrative then needs to follow, I suspect. It's fantastic to have the joint working, but I'll stratify these. I'll try to segment these SDGs. Which are the ones that, do we have an idea of, is it doable? If it's a capital issue, it's not doable. What else could be done? So some of these would be great, but still they might be in the same mode as we would have been 5 years ago. This will take 5 years to implement. There is no 5 years here. This is not treating an elective patient. This is about more of an acute nature here. Because the longer this stays, and I think the public will understand that, the worse this will get, and the more expensive it will become to fix. And I think that narrative needs to come up from NHS, but at the same time needs to have the political cover as well. Because if the narrative is not wrong, people from the bottom, narrative, and then stratify them, who needs the help to do it? Even if they have, there are many organizations within the NHS that may have the vision and the strategy, but not necessarily have the tools and the competency in execution. And I think that's the role we could play.
Yeah. Great. Completely agree.
Malcolm, you want to
Could
respond
I
to
just follow that up, Ara, because it seems to me that one of the voices that's so far missing in all of this is the clinician voice. It's the leadership from the clinical community that can be, I think, very persuasive for public and also for managers in the NHS. That these choices are really truly in the interest of patients.
Yeah. Which there's another problem there. We need to re-engage them, bring them back. They actually need to believe this is. If they say this, they will be supported to make the changes. Most of the clinicians know what the prescription is. Yes. Carol.
Which is exactly what I was going to reflect on in relation to these, and I just have one factual question I'll ask at the end. But I do think one of the problems for the NHS as the system as a whole is that we're facing the need for enormous change, and our capacity to explain and communicate that change out to the outside world has not caught up yet with the level of rate of change that we need to deliver. And Ara's absolutely right that it's sometimes the language we use, all of us, in all of these papers, makes you weep. It's sort of, even the very title NHS Improvements sort of, we must all have this problem. When you say, I'm a non-exec director of NHS Improvement, people look at you blankly and I say, well, actually that oversees all the hospitals in the country. And then they sort of realise what you do. And we need to, I know it's terribly difficult to invest in areas like this when we've got so many other problems, but we're not going to get the change through that we need unless we get a really sophisticated view of how we communicate and bring people with us. Because the great strength of the NHS is it's owned by the patients and it's owned by the people. It's not actually owned by governments or anything else. But that is also a problem when we're trying to deliver change. So, North Cumbria, where I spend so much time, we're in the midst of this great campaign against moving consultant-led obstetrics from Whitehaven to Carlisle. And that's just because people are scared, and there's not a proper explanation given to them. And there's been no proper attempt to bring opinion formers in the local community alongside it. And we need to do that, or we won't get the change that you're quite rightly saying we need. And then I wanted to follow that with one little question, which perhaps I'll give to Bob, which is, since we now have a government policy that we're going to invest in infrastructure, can't we sort of make a claim for some of the capital funds for investing in new hospitals out of the why should infrastructure be roads and railways and not hospitals?
That's a very reasonable question. Caroline. If I could give you a definitive answer, I most certainly would. I think inevitably...
Will we make the case? Can we make the case for that?
We will be pushing as best we can to secure appropriate levels of investment needed to drive change where we can be absolutely clear around the benefit that brings to patients, efficiency, quality of care. Just as of today,
Yeah.
off the back of yesterday, I haven't quite started on it.
We are having conversations about capital generally. We've said some things recently. I've got a session with the Treasury next week, and we need to get a plan together that I think takes a more realistic aspiration out of the STPs and translates it into a requirement, and if that's aimed at the infrastructure resource or whatever it is, it's completely unthinkable that we'll pull this kind of change off without some kind of capital investment. And we've got hospitals that seriously need so we'll do absolutely everything we can, Caroline, to try and pitch it in the right way.
There's a little bit on this though as well of the same point that Malcolm made about how money flows in our system. The capital system we set up wasn't set up for these purposes. It was set up for a very market-based approach and for individual organisations sort of managing their own capital investment. So there's part of this is a rethinking of a financial regime that frankly doesn't support what we're trying to do now.
Absolutely.
So I think I'd like to come back to that because we could have a big debate about capital. I think it's best if we come back to the board on things that we are doing, because we have to pick up the very significant cap to rev transfer that's inherent in the current numbers, what's that's doing to just essential maintenance capital, keeping the lights on capital, never mind the type of redesign capital that is needed. And so we will come back to the board on that. I think it's fair to say if we do it now, I think we will be laying some things which will be significantly underdeveloped.
It would be speculative.
And it would be speculative. So.
The thing I might say, if you don't mind though, is that coming back to the point about rethinking the regime, we should not forget our other public sector partners who are crucial to making local change happen. So I think an opportunity to work better with local government, I think, ought to be part of our future capital building.
Yeah, which is the point Malcolm made about the engagement of the local government in the STP process, which, to be honest, is the first for quite a while that we've had that proximity of local government support and engagement. Kathy, I know you wanted to...
Just quickly, I just wanted to come back to the clinical engagement point. I know, Jim, you said at the beginning of this that, a letter will go out, there's something about clinical engagement. I do think not just the communication element, but actually now is the time really to get clinicians really committed to this, because they will engage with the patients and I don't mean just, clinical health clinicians, but, in social care, and there are similar kind of people. If we can get all of that absolutely owning this, driving this at the local, you'll get the story about what does it mean, for improvement, and they'll be able to sell it for you. Ara, your process, which obviously, I was closely involved in at the time, was very clinically led and driven, and then change actually happened as a consequence. We could all argue more needed to happen, but change happened as a consequence. I think if we miss this trick, we will regret it, and I think that the base is there. Get the clinicians, they'll do the job for you. And I don't just mean the managerial clinicians, I mean the people who are actually treating the patients on a day-to-day basis, primary care, secondary care, and so on. I think I hear a lot, they're really keen to get involved. And if we were able to signal between our organisations that this was now the moment to step forward, I think it would have a real impact. And we shouldn't be scared they'll want to spend loads of money. I think they'll do I think they'll help us in a completely different way.
Yeah. We will agree with that.
Well, I just want to ask Kathy really, or Ara as well probably, which is, so what do you think are the hurdles at the moment that are stopping this happening this time around when Ara's worked the magic in the past?
You want to answer that?
Well, we started, there were different times. There were much, much better times. Despite all of that, there was a significant disengagement by the clinical community because everyone felt things were done to them rather than with them. And this is very different. This is a very different time. And I think what we need to get out there and engage the clinicians is what's the diagnosis here? what's the problem? And I said what the problem is. There is no more money. I mean, the whole world knows that. It's not just the UK. And we need to live within the means of the NHS. We've seen the budget yesterday. Disappointed that there's no social care funding. So we need your help. And most of them do have ideas of change, and I'm sure a lot of them have contributed to this process, but not the overall majority. And really winning their hearts and minds to get people to have the confidence in standing up on platforms and explaining to the public more than the patients. Patients are actually reasonably happy still, despite the cancellations, but the public, that this change is inevitable. And we're doing these changes because we need to reshape some of the services based on technology, based on constraints we have in delivering a higher quality service to our patients. And that's really what I did. There was no magic formula in what I did. Just managed to get, and I think we could do the same. As I said, there is no magic.
And we must commit to that. And we must commit to that, and we must commit to the engagement with. We were at an event last night, Malcolm, myself, Peter Wyman, a number of other people, where we talked about Imagine 2030. And I know that sounds a long time ago, but we know most of the inputs to what the world of health and care will be by 2030. We can estimate them. The challenge is in the scheme of big change, that's not that far away. We need to chunk it down and work out what we're doing now. Quite frankly, the STPs are a fantastic vehicle if we get them right, if we get the engagement right, we get the narrative right, we get the resources that Malcolm and Simon and Jim and others are talking about to put behind them. We will actually get change starting to happen on that trajectory to something that seems a long way away, but in the life of a health and care system is not that far away. So, Sigurd, quickly, and then we must move on. But I think there's been a good conversation about the next stage of STPs, Jim.
I was actually going to make a different point, and I will go on and make it. Before that, sparing Ara's blushes, there was a magic trick to what you did, and I'm thinking particularly of the work you did in London, which I was quite, close to, as you know. And that was Ara took great care to involve clinicians in every single one of the work streams in leading positions, and that, I think, was a really important reason why that succeeded as well as it did. Anyway, the other point, I just wanted to get my oar in apropos of capital and the STPs. We need to make absolutely sure that each of these plans, as they now begin to turn into plans as opposed to aspirations, provide for the necessary IT that's going to need to be there to support the changes in care pathways and so on. And so it's just not to quantify it, but nevertheless a bid, if you like, from that side, that we do not underestimate the support structure that will be needed.
That's a good point. And Keith McNeill was with us last night, and we had quite a big discussion about technology, the work of the National Information Board. Noel Gordon was with us last night, and we talked about the platforms and stuff that we need for that. And I think I would like actually to invite Keith back. He was there for a development day, but Keith and Noel back to a future board conversation about the role that digital data and technology plays in helping support the STP change processes. So a really good conversation. I mean, Jim, I think we have to recognise the next stage is really gearing up and really aligning resources and doing, as Ara suggested, which is working out for each of the 44 where each of them are, letting, I think as Malcolm said, some of them just blow through what might be seen as something got in their way to progress, whereas the others, they need real help, but it's help of different kinds, depending on where they are. Absolutely. So thank you for that.